The room smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon-spiced yams, and something else expectation. Every Thanksgiving, my father found a way to turn a family holiday into a formal event, complete with crystal glasses, linen napkins, and awkward seating charts. This year was no different, but something in the air felt heavier, tighter, like the calm before a hurricane. I sat between my mother and a cousin I barely knew quietly sipping white wine, watching the flickering fireplace across the room. My father, Edwin Moore, stood at the head of the long oak table knife still glistening from carving the turkey. His face carried that familiar mixture of authority and distance, the kind that always made me sit up a little straighter as a child. My older brother Gregory was already 2 glasses deep into red wine and laughing loudly with our uncle across the table. He always felt more at home here, more welcome. Maybe that's why I moved away. Maybe that's why I learned to listen before I spoke. Before we begin this beautiful meal, my father began tapping his knife gently against the edge of his glass to draw the room's attention. I have an important announcement regarding the future of our family legacy. Everyone fell silent. Even Gregory turned serious, straightening in his chair, as if expecting a crown to be placed on his head. My mother looked down at her lap, already knowing what was coming. She didn't need words. Years of marriage had taught her how to read every pause in his voice. As you all know, my father continued. More publishing has been a cornerstone of this family for nearly 4 decades. We've printed thousands of books, launched the careers of some of the South's finest authors, and weathered the storms of digital disruption with grace and grit. Heads nodded. A few cousins clapped politely. I said nothing. I just watched. But I'm 72, he said, setting the knife down with a deliberate clang. And it's time for me to step back and enjoy the years I have left. Your mother and I want to travel, see the world while we still can. Gregory leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Are you saying you're retiring? My father smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not just retiring. We're selling more publishing. Gasps. Forks paused midair. Someone at the far end dropped a napkin. My heart didn't skip a beat. I had known for months. But I waited. We've received an offer, he said. A very generous one. Enough for your mother and me to live the rest of our lives comfortably. Gregory leaned even further. Wait. So, what happens to the company who's taking over? My father's expression changed just slightly. No one in this room. Gregory blinked. What do you mean, my father said, voice sharpening. None of you will be involved. The business is being sold outright to new ownership. And before anyone asks, no, there will be no shares, no transfers, no inheritance. This is a clean exit. The room fell into stunned silence. Gregory's face turned red. You're not giving us anything. You're getting nothing, my father said with finality. The new buyers want a streamlined transition. No family entanglements. My uncle cleared his throat awkwardly. My mother looked away. I looked directly at my father, but he didn't meet my eyes. Gregory sputtered. But I thought I'd slide into a CEO chair and start calling shots. My father interrupted. Gregory, you've spent the last 5 years trying to launch a podcast that hasn't made a single dollar. You never once asked me how contracts work, how print runs are scheduled, how distribution rights are negotiated. That's not fair, Gregory said, voice rising. I'm your son. Being my son doesn't entitle you to 40 years of work you didn't help build, my father said calmly. He looked around the table. Inheritance isn't a birthright. It's something you earn, and none of you have earned this. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't moved. My silence for once wasn't out of fear. It was precision, timing, strategy. I raised my glass, slowly met my father's gaze, and asked one question. Who's the buyer? My name is Olivia Moore. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. But for the past 4 years, I've lived in Boston. I work in digital publishing, at least that's what I tell most people. What I actually do is lead a company I built from the ground up. But we'll get to that later. Growing up, I was always the quiet one in the Moore household. Not shy, observant. I listened when others talked over each other. I remember details others missed. I read between the lines long before I learned to write in cursive. While Gregory was the loud, charismatic golden boy of the family, I was the girl who read books under the dinner table, who stayed late after school to help the librarian reshelve returns. Our father, Edwin Moore, founder and CEO of Moore Publishing, rarely looked in my direction unless I was holding a manuscript he needed proofed. Gregory got the fishing trips. I got grammar correction duties. Still, I loved the world of books. I loved the way paper felt between my fingers. I loved the clatter of typewriters and the scent of ink from the print floor. So, I stayed. After graduating with honors in literature and a second degree in business administration from Vanderbilt, I returned home and started at the bottom rung of the company. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand everything: the process, the people, the pressure. I worked in the editorial department first, proofreading historical nonfiction, then marketing, where I helped revive a failing regional memoir series, then contracts, where I negotiated terms with authors and agents. At 28, I became the youngest senior editor Moore Publishing had ever had. But titles didn't mean much in our family. Gregory had no title but more influence than I ever did. He would waltz into the office, suggest something ridiculous like turning our poetry line into NFTs, and leave with Dad's blessing to experiment with innovation. I had to submit formal proposals just to increase the marketing budget by 5%. Still, I held on. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I proved my worth in numbers and impact, maybe I'd be trusted to help shape the company's future. I was wrong. 4 years ago, I found discrepancies in our financials funds being funneled out under vague labels like consultant services and executive outreach. The amounts weren't massive individually, but they added up to nearly $500,000 over 3 years. I brought the matter to our CFO. He shrugged and said Edwin signed off on it. I pressed further, only to discover Gregory's name attached to one of the shell accounts. When I confronted my father, I expected resistance. What I got was dismissal. "That's none of your concern, Olivia," he said. "You focus on editing. Let us handle the finances." "Us?" I asked. "Gregory isn't even an employee. He's family," my father replied. "So am I said. Not in the same way he answered. That conversation marked the beginning of the end. Within weeks, I was informed my vision for the future of publishing was no longer aligned with Moore's brand values. I was given a severance package, a glowing recommendation letter, and a silent shove out the door. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I packed my things, flew to Boston, and got to work. For the next 3 years, I lived like a ghost in the eyes of my family. No visits, no calls, no updates. I sent my mother birthday flowers each year, but never a return address. I watched from afar as Moore Publishing drifted toward irrelevance, slow to adapt, slow to digitize, clinging to dusty processes, while readers shifted online. Meanwhile, I built something new, something agile, something designed for the modern era. I named it Verse Vault. It started as a digital archive of forgotten Southern authors' public domain works, with fresh typography, interactive annotations, and audio recordings, narrated by contemporary voices. Then it grew. We partnered with libraries, then schools, then niche imprints. We acquired small digital publishers struggling with infrastructure and folded them into our ecosystem. We created AI-enhanced tools for authors to format, distribute, and market their own works across platforms. Within 2 years, VerseVault was no longer just a platform. It was an engine. I raised capital under a holding company, Lexicon Holdings, to keep acquisitions separate from the VerseVault brand. Quietly, strategically, I targeted traditional publishers who'd failed to modernize. Moore Publishing wasn't the first on my list. It wasn't even the second. But when rumors started swirling in Charleston about my father's health, about Gregory trying to restructure the legacy, I knew what was coming. I knew they'd sell. I also knew exactly what the company was worth. Not just in dollars, but in what could be salvaged. I ran a shadow due diligence, gathered all available public data, reconstructed internal metrics from past contacts, and reached out through intermediaries. I submitted an offer through Lexicon Holdings. It was accepted without a single question about who was behind the company. And that's how I ended up back at this Thanksgiving table drinking my wine while my father announced the sale of the business and my complete exclusion from its future. He thought I was still that quiet girl in the corner, but I wasn't. Not anymore. Moore Publishing wasn't just a family business. It was the very backbone of our family identity. My grandfather Theodore Moore had founded it in 1961 with a single rotary press in a rented garage behind his house. Back then, it was called Moore and Sons Press, even though he had no sons at the time, just my grandmother and a baby girl. The name was aspirational. Eventually, his son, my father Edwin, took over, and he lived out the and Sons part, always hoping Gregory would follow in his footsteps. By the time I was born, Moore Publishing had grown from a garage press to a regional powerhouse. We printed for universities, churches, historical societies, and later independent authors. The Moore name appeared in the footer of thousands of books across the South. In Charleston, it was almost sacred. We weren't just a family, we were a legacy. Growing up in that environment meant everything I did was somehow tied to the company. When I learned to read, it was on proofs from the children's line. When I learned to ride a bike, it was in the parking lot behind the publishing house. I spent my summers alphabetizing author contracts in the back office and fetching coffee for editors. I knew what a galley was before I knew how to spell Mississippi. By high school, I was proofreading submissions late into the night, sometimes next to my father's desk. He'd look over and say, "You missed a comma on page 14," without even glancing at the manuscript. That was how he taught through challenge, not praise. Praise was for Gregory, always Gregory. Gregory who crashed the delivery truck into a lamppost and still got a smile from Dad. Gregory who quit college after 3 semesters but was still called next in line. Gregory who hosted book launches with whiskey in hand, charming authors he hadn't even read. And yet, I didn't resent him, not at first. I believed, perhaps naively, that effort mattered. That loyalty meant something, so I worked. When the industry began shifting Amazon ebooks print on demand, I was the first to raise concerns. We need to modernize, I said. We need to digitize our backlist, offer EPUB files, consider licensing to audiobook platforms. My father waved me off. Books are meant to be held, he said. Real readers want real pages. I persisted. I drafted full digital strategy proposals, projected revenue streams, and even contacted local developers to explore building an in-house app. Gregory laughed at the idea. "We're not a tech startup, Liv," he'd say. "Let Silicon Valley ruin literature. We print real books." I stayed anyway. I kept trying. When the company faced a downturn in 2015, after losing several academic contracts, I personally negotiated a partnership with a nonprofit historical archive. That deal kept us afloat for nearly 2 years. I wasn't even thanked. Instead, Gregory was praised for bringing in a celebrity cookbook author who abandoned the deal after learning he'd have to pay for his own book tour. My mother, sweet and silent, watched it all unfold from behind her knitting. She'd tried to speak up once when I was passed over for a promotion I'd earned twice. "Edwin," she said, "Olivia's been running the editorial department in all but title." My father replied, "She's not ready for the politics of leadership." I didn't need politics. I needed equity, fairness, truth. But in the Moore household, truth was flexible, often bent around the person with the loudest voice or the firmest handshake. When I discovered the financial discrepancies, I didn't jump to conclusions. I ran a quiet audit, verified line items, cross-checked signatures. I genuinely hoped, it was a clerical error. But it wasn't. It was deliberate. Gregory had been siphoning company funds into a shell company registered under the name Moore Legacy Consulting LLC, which had no employees, no office, and no clear services rendered. The money, $487,000, had been paid out in chunks over 3 years. When I presented the findings to our CFO, he looked nervous. "He's your father's son," he said. "I'd let this go." I didn't. I scheduled a meeting with my father. He listened, arms crossed, eyes hard. Then he told me to forget it. "He's just trying to build something of his own," he said. "With company money?" I asked. "With what I've worked to preserve." "He's experimenting," Dad replied. "You're making this too personal." Of course it was personal. Everything in this business was personal. Every author I'd fought to keep, every editor I'd mentored, every broken copier I'd fixed myself when no one else would. This company was as much my life's work as it was his. Maybe more. But I didn't fight back. Not outwardly. I handed in a resignation letter masked as a sabbatical request. It was accepted within hours. They even held a farewell lunch in the break room. Gregory gave a toast. To live, he said, raising his glass, who finally learned that publishing isn't for everyone. Everyone laughed. I smiled and left. That night, I sat in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Charleston and made a list, not of grievances, of plans. I wrote down everything More Publishing did well, everything it did badly, and everything it refused to acknowledge. Then I flipped the page and started outlining a platform that could do better, that could honor authors, that could pay editors fairly, that could distribute globally with a few clicks, that could render companies like More obsolete not by destroying them, but by offering something readers and writers actually needed. Over the next 6 months, I pitched to friends, to colleagues, to investors who specialized in literary tech. I was rejected dozens of times. But each rejection sharpened the idea, made it clearer, made me stronger. I built a prototype of Verse Vault with 2 engineers I met at a publishing conference. We launched in beta with 20 digitized titles and one librarian from Alabama who offered to tag metadata in exchange for a coffee subscription. Slowly, authors began to notice, then readers, then institutions. Within 18 months, we had enough traction to attract private funding. Verse Vault was born, and with it the seeds of something far greater than More Publishing had ever dared to become, all because I had been underestimated, all because I had been denied, all because they thought I would disappear. While I was building Verse Vault in the quiet corners of Boston co-working spaces and learning how to pitch to VCs who still called me sweetheart back in Charleston, the More legacy was unraveling in silence. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. The storefront still bore our embossed gold letter signage. The quarterly newsletter still boasted book launches and author events. But I knew the signs of a company in slow decay. Sales were stalling, partnerships were drying up, the poetry line had gone dormant. The young authors I once mentored had either self-published or gone digital with other firms. More Publishing had become a symbol nostalgic, respected, but no longer necessary. Then I started hearing whispers. A former author reached out through my LinkedIn alias and asked if I'd heard the news. Apparently, Gregory had started introducing himself as Chief Strategy Officer at Literary Mixers. He was rumored to be seeking acquisition partners talking about next-gen disruption, a phrase I once used in a proposal he laughed at. The real betrayal, though, wasn't the sale. It wasn't even the siphoning of funds. It was how they rewrote the narrative. At an industry luncheon captured on video, Gregory gave a speech about the legacy of More Publishing, how the company had survived transitions by letting go of outdated ideas, and how he was guiding the brand toward digital relevance. My name was never mentioned, not once. I had spent 10 years keeping that company alive. I had ghostwritten pitches, led survival strategy meetings, trained entire departments. But in Gregory's version of events, I didn't exist. In my father's, I was just the daughter who moved away. It was more than exclusion. It was erasure. And yet I didn't retaliate. Not then, not publicly. I watched, I collected. I studied their moves. Every trademark update, every small business loan application, every consultant hire. I requested reports under different business names, downloaded free samples of their books, just to study metadata changes. I learned who they were using for print on demand, who they pitched partnerships to, and how desperate they were becoming for a buyer. That was when Lexicon Holdings stepped in. Lexicon, my silent weapon, my legal veil, my fortress. I had built it specifically to make strategic acquisitions through intermediaries. When More Publishing listed itself discreetly through a business broker platform, Lexicon placed a bid, not the highest, but the most structured. It came with a promise, full retention of staff, preservation of brand identity, and smooth succession, with existing leadership stepping down. They jumped at it. They didn't even ask who was behind the offer. Not once. That was the final confirmation of everything I already knew. They didn't just overlook me. They had never truly seen me. Even when I sat in meetings, drove emergency shipments, rewrote failing author contracts, they never believed I was essential. I was replaceable. I was silent. I was gone. And so when the acquisition neared completion, when all the contracts were reviewed, signed and escrowed, I booked a flight back to Charleston. I RSVP'd to Thanksgiving dinner, told my mother I'd be home, and listened to the hesitation in her voice before she said, "That would be lovely, dear." She didn't know. No one knew. Not yet. But soon they would. Thanksgiving dinner had always been a performance in the Moore household. But this year, it felt more like a production stage for an audience that hadn't read the script. The dining room was dressed in its usual pretentious elegance: polished mahogany table, inherited china with gold trim, and antique candelabras casting long shadows over plates of cornbread stuffing and glazed carrots. The guest list included our extended family, a few clients turned friends of my father's, and of course Gregory, who had taken it upon himself to open the wine far too early, and was already on his third glass before we even sat down. I had barely taken my seat when my father stood commanding the room with a clink of his knife against his glass. He didn't bother waiting for silence. He expected it. "Before we dive into this beautiful meal your mother prepared," he began, "I have an important announcement to make." The room fell still. Forks hovered in midair. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. As many of you know, Moore Publishing has been the pride of our family for over 40 years. My father built it, I grew it, and now it's time to secure its future beyond me. Gregory straightened in his seat, trying to appear casual, but practically vibrating with anticipation. After careful consideration, my father continued, "We've accepted an offer to sell Moore Publishing." A collective murmur rippled around the table, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Gregory beamed, clearly expecting to be named as the successor, or perhaps part of some internal restructuring. My mother kept her eyes down, hands folded tightly in her lap. "The company will be transferred in full," my father said. "And for the sake of a clean transition, there will be no family ownership moving forward. No shares, no retained rights. No involvement from any of my children. Dead silence. The kind that makes time feel like it's folding in on itself. "You're selling the company without us!" Gregory blurted, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Without any stake, any say." "Correct," my father said flatly. "This decision ensures stability. The buyers are professionals. The company deserves leadership that isn't entangled in personal assumptions or family expectations." I sat still, carefully placing my wineglass down. I could feel every eye on me waiting for my reaction. Gregory's face turned a deeper shade of red. "You're just cutting us out." "This is business, Gregory," my father replied. "And business requires hard decisions." Gregory's voice cracked. "But we're your children." "Don't we deserve something?" "Deserve," my father echoed. "Deserve is a dangerous word. You earn responsibility. You prove capability. You've done neither." I could see the calculation behind his words, the years of justifications he'd built for himself. This wasn't sudden. This was a narrative he'd been writing in his mind for years. And in that moment, with everyone's attention fixed on him, basking in his sense of resolution and control, I saw my opening. "Who's the buyer?" I asked. My voice was calm, clear. He turned toward me, almost startled, as if he'd forgotten I was at the table. "What's that?" "Who's buying the company?" I repeated. The room held its breath, and just like that, the power dynamic began to shift. Gregory leaned back in his chair, barely suppressing a smirk. The kind of smug, rehearsed expression he wore as a teenager when he got away with skipping curfew and blamed it on car trouble. "So that's it," he said, trying to sound surprised, but already basking in the spotlight. "You've done it. Finally sold the family empire. Guess retirement is calling." He raised his glass as if to toast, but no one joined him. My father nodded approvingly. "It's time. Your mother and I have other dreams now. Travel. Peace. Less stress." Gregory glanced around the table, clearly expecting applause. "I'm happy for you, Dad. Really. And listen, if the new owners ever need someone with industry insight, someone who knows the brand from the inside, well, you know where to find me." He chuckled. No one laughed with him. Across the table, my aunt avoided his gaze, and one of our cousins coughed awkwardly into her napkin. I said nothing. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence swell around me like a second skin. My mother reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. She looked at me briefly, a flicker of apology in her eyes, but said nothing. My father had turned away from me again, his attention back on his meal, satisfied the speech was over and the decision made. They all believed I had been sidelined, that I'd taken the blow with grace, maybe even numbness. They thought I was out of the picture, a relic of the past, the quiet daughter who had once tried to make a mark but failed. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that the story they thought was ending had just started to turn the page. I adjusted my silverware, folded my napkin, and cleared my throat. I asked a question. I said softly, "Who's buying the company?" The room turned toward me again, startled by the return of my voice. My father looked confused for a split second. "It's a firm out of Boston," he said. "Lexicon Holdings. Ever heard of them?" "Yes," I said. "I have." I let the name hang in the air for a moment, watching the recognition fail to dawn on anyone at the table. Gregory poured himself more wine, assuming the conversation had passed him by. My father returned to his plate, already dismissing my question as curiosity, not confrontation. But my mother was still looking at me, eyes narrowing just slightly, picking up on something no one else did. "Lexicon Holdings," I repeated slowly. "The firm out of Boston." My father nodded. "Very professional outfit, sharp negotiators, but respectful. They understand the publishing space and they have the capital to take more publishing into the next era. That's what they told you I asked. That they're professionals who respect the business." "Yes," he said, straightening slightly, sensing a tone he didn't quite like. "They've made commitments to preserve the brand, retain staff, honor existing contracts. It's a clean deal." "Interesting," I said, reaching into my bag. From it, I pulled a slim leather folder, something I had carried for months, waiting for this exact moment. "Did you ever wonder who was behind Lexicon Holdings? Who submitted the offer?" My father looked annoyed. "They're a private firm. The documents say as much. They work through legal intermediaries. That's standard." "It is," I agreed. "But it's not anonymous if you know where to look." I opened the folder, slowly sliding the first page across the table. It was the official offer letter. The logo at the top read, "Lexicon Holdings," but beneath it was a signature line. My signature. I turned the page. The articles of incorporation filed in Massachusetts listing me as the managing director. Another page. Banking verification, proof of funds, asset documentation. My father stared at them, blinking slowly, his fork frozen in midair. Gregory leaned over to look, squinting like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "What is this?" he asked. "These are the documents your lawyers reviewed," I said. "This is the deal you accepted. Lexicon Holdings is my company. I founded it. I funded it. I led the acquisition." Silence dropped like a thunderclap. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant buzz of traffic outside. No one spoke, not even Gregory. My father's jaw tightened. "You're behind this." "Yes," I said. "I've been behind it from the beginning." My mother's eyes widened. "Olivia, you how I didn't leave the industry when I left Charleston," I said. "I left the building, but I built something better." The room didn't move. It was as if every atom in the air had been frozen by my words. My father looked down at the papers again, as if a second glance might rewrite what he'd just heard. Gregory leaned forward, eyebrows raised in disbelief, but for once he had nothing clever to say. My mother, still holding her glass, slowly set it down and looked at me like she was seeing a stranger who wore her daughter's face. "You built a company?" my father asked slowly, his voice rough around the edges. "You how long?" 4 years, I said. "I started it after I left more publishing, after you pushed me out." "No one pushed you out," Gregory muttered. "You quit." "I was made to quit," I said sharply. "Because I found out what you were doing with the company's money. Because I asked questions you didn't want answered. And instead of listening, instead of even talking to me like a professional, you both dismissed me as a nuisance, as a liability." I turned back to my father. "So yes, I left. And while you ignored the changes happening in the industry, while you clung to ink and paper like a religion, I built something new, something sustainable, something scalable." He still hadn't touched his fork. His knuckles were white where he gripped the table edge. "What does Lexicon even do?" he asked. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Lexicon Holdings is a parent company. We acquire legacy publishing houses and modernize their operations' digital distribution, global licensing, data-driven marketing. We give authors tools to control their own rights and royalties. We work with libraries, schools, and international readers. We don't just publish books, we create ecosystems. And you're telling me, Gregory said, finally finding his voice, that you've been doing this what behind our backs? No, I said calmly. I've been doing it in plain sight. You just never bothered to ask. You were too busy pretending to be important at events you didn't understand. I added, turning to him again, you never once picked up the phone. Not to ask what I was building, not to ask why I left. You didn't see value in me unless I was under your roof operating by your rules. I don't believe this, he muttered. You've been planning this all along. I didn't plan to buy more publishing, I said. Not at first. I just planned to prove you wrong. The weight of that admission settled over the table like a thick fog. But when I heard the company was up for sale, I continued. I realized I could do both, prove my worth and preserve the company in a way that actually honors what it once stood for. I didn't want it to disappear. I wanted to rescue it from irrelevance. Gregory scoffed. Rescue it? You're tearing it away from the family. The family let it rot, I snapped. You used it like an ATM. Dad turned it into a shrine to his ego. No one thought about its future, just about their inheritance. I paused, letting that land. But I did. I always did. My mother's voice came softly from the end of the table. Olivia, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, the only person at that table whose question wasn't laced with anger or accusation. Because every time I tried to talk about what I loved, no one listened, I said. Every time I brought up strategy, data, innovation, you all changed the subject, treated me like a child, so I stopped talking. And I started building. Gregory pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He looked at me like I'd just announced I was a spy or an alien. You're seriously telling us that you, Olivia, who used to cry over rejected manuscripts, you're now some publishing mogul. You built a company that's, what? Buying out our legacy. I looked at him calmly. Yes, Gregory, I did, and I'm not some mogul. I'm the founder and CEO of a firm with 8 acquisitions, over 100 employees, and international licensing deals in 6 countries. I didn't do it by accident. I did it because I had to. My father picked up the papers again, flipping through the documents like he could find a hidden loophole, a joke, a misprint. We reviewed this deal with attorneys, he said. You sent us financial statements, corporate filings, everything checked out. Of course it did, I said. Lexicon is real. Its funding is real. Its growth is real. I just made sure you wouldn't connect it to me until I was ready. I worked through intermediaries, shell entities, and non-disclosures for a reason. Because if you had known, you would have rejected the offer out of pride. He didn't argue. That silence was confirmation. Why he finally asked. Why pay full price? You could have come to me directly. We could have arranged something. Your family. Because I didn't want this to be about family, I said. I wanted to be seen as a professional, not a daughter doing a favor or asking for one. I wanted to prove that I could earn what you refused to give me. I wanted you to see that I am not your backup plan. I'm your best case scenario. The silence deepened. My mother leaned forward slightly, her eyes wet. Olivia, she said, what is it you want now? I paused for a moment. The question mattered. It always had. I looked around the table. I want this acquisition to stand. I want more publishing to survive. But I want it to evolve, to grow. And that means letting go of old assumptions. There won't be automatic promotions, no ceremonial roles for family members. If anyone here wants to be part of what's coming next, they'll have to earn it. You're cutting us out, Gregory said bitterly. I'm offering a way in, I corrected. A real way in. Not through nepotism, but through effort. If you want to work at Lexicon, there are positions. Entry level. Training required. Clear expectations. Actual accountability. My father looked at me, the weight of years pressing into the lines of his face. And if we say no, then you enjoy your retirement, I said. Take your payout. Live your life. but don't expect me to pretend we're partners. You made your decision when you sold the company. I'm just making sure it goes to someone who actually cares about it." Gregory was quiet now, his earlier smugness replaced by something harder to place resentment maybe, or fear. My mother nodded slowly. "You always did care," she said softly. I turned to her. "I still do." My father stared at the documents again, slower this time, not searching for errors, but absorbing the reality of what they meant. The signature was unmistakable. My name, my authority, my choice. "You've done all this," he said quietly, "on your own." I didn't blink. "Yes, with no help. No investment from us. No favors. None. Every dollar came from private investors, every hire from personal vetting. I even structured the offer to ensure your retirement funds were secure, untied from company performance or my decisions." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't skepticism or disappointment. It was recognition, not of a daughter, but of an equal. "Why didn't you ever tell me what you were building?" "Because you wouldn't have believed in it," I said. "You wouldn't have believed in me. And even if you had, you would have seen it as a side project, a distraction, or worse, as an extension of your legacy, something you could take partial credit for. I needed to build something that was mine. Entirely mine." My mother let out a breath she'd been holding. "You were always the one who stayed late at the office. You were the one who took the weekend shifts. I used to worry it was making you lonely." I looked at her, the tension in my jaw softening slightly. I wasn't lonely. I was focused. Gregory stood arms crossed, pacing at the edge of the dining room. "So what now? You ride in with your business empire and just own us." "No," I said. "I'm offering you the same thing Dad offered me, an opportunity. You're welcome to apply, to earn your way back in, but not through your last name, not through pity, through performance." He scoffed, shaking his head, but he didn't argue. The room remained silent for a long moment, each person adjusting to the new reality one, where I wasn't a quiet presence in the background, but the one holding the future in my hands. My father finally spoke again. "You saved it, didn't you? The company. You saved more publishing." "No," I said, "you saved it. You built something worth saving. I just made sure it had a future." And with that, the last illusion between us crumbled. Gregory returned to his seat slowly. The bravado drained from his posture. He looked at me, then at our father, then back at the untouched plate in front of him. "So what happens to us?" he asked, quieter now. "To me, to the rest of the family." I didn't answer right away. I wanted the weight of the question to land. "That depends," I said finally, "on what you're willing to do. If you want to work for the company, you'll have to apply, just like anyone else. There are no guarantees, no shortcuts, no family appointments. This is a business now, not a family fiefdom." Gregory looked away, but he didn't protest. That silence told me more than any argument could. My father watched him carefully, then turned to me. "And what about me?" he asked. "Do I have a place in this future you're building?" I met his eyes. "If you want it. As an advisor, consultant, legacy support. I respect what you've built, Dad. I'm not trying to erase it, but I won't let it define the next chapter. You can be part of the story if you're willing to let go of the pen." He nodded slowly, absorbing the truth that had taken years to arrive. My mother looked relieved. Her shoulders dropped, and for the first time that evening she smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to show she saw the possibility of peace. "I think that's more than fair," she said. "You've done more than any of us imagined, and you've done it with grace." Gregory muttered something under his breath, then looked up. "I'll apply," he said reluctantly. "I want to learn. For real this time. If you'll let me." I gave him a single nod. "It won't be easy. You'll be treated like everyone else. But if you show up, if you're serious, there's a path." He didn't thank me. That would come later, if at all. But the fact that he accepted the terms even silently was enough for now. The table had shifted. The family dynamic had changed. And in the silence that followed, I realized we had reached something rare and necessary understanding, built not on blood, but on earned respect. Over the next several weeks, the transition moved forward with the kind of momentum that only clarity can bring. The acquisition was finalized without legal hiccups, the escrow cleared, and ownership officially changed hands. Press releases went out under the Lexicon Holdings banner, announcing the integration of More Publishing into a broader digital future, while maintaining its historic brand identity. Authors reached out with cautious optimism, staff members with curiosity and concern. I flew back to Boston, but I returned regularly to Charleston not as a visitor this time, but as a leader. My first order of business was to hold private interviews with every remaining employee at More Publishing. I wanted to hear their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. Some had been there since before I graduated high school. Others were recent hires, skeptical of the digital direction, but willing to listen. I wasn't there to make promises. I was there to listen and to build. My father remained on in an advisory capacity, but it was clear even to him that his time had passed. He took on a new role, quietly helping smooth over legacy client relationships, answering historical questions, and guiding senior editors through the emotional process of accepting change. It wasn't easy for him, but to his credit, he didn't resist. Perhaps he saw something of himself in me now. Perhaps he was simply tired. Either way, he stepped back with grace. Gregory joined Lexicon's 6-month leadership training program. He started at the lowest level, client support, and was paired with a mentor who had no idea he was my brother. His first week was rough. I watched from a distance as he stumbled through onboarding materials, struggled with process documentation, and resisted the humility required of beginners. But he didn't quit, and that in itself was a start. My mother became something of a bridge between the old and the new. She helped organize a heritage archive for the company, preserving letters, first edition proofs and oral histories from More Publishing's earliest years. She had a talent for memory, for knowing what to keep and what to let go. One day she handed me a box filled with old photos, news clippings, and a yellowed first check from a 1964 author who had insisted on paying in cash. "This isn't mine to keep anymore," she said. "It's yours now. But don't forget where it came from. I never intended to erase More Publishing. I intended to save it from becoming irrelevant." The real justice wasn't in revenge. It was in restoration, taking something broken by ego, blindness, and entitlement, and reshaping it into something durable, meaningful, and forward-looking. That justice wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was earned. We held the first Lexicon More Team Summit 3 months later. We gathered staff from both Boston and Charleston, hosted panel discussions, shared visions, and unveiled new cross-platform strategies. I stood at the podium in the very hall where More Publishing had once celebrated its 50th anniversary. This time the banners bore both names, More and Lexicon, and beneath those banners stood people who had chosen to stay, to adapt, to grow. The company wasn't just surviving, it was transforming. And so were we. 6 months after the acquisition, we held an employee appreciation event in Charleston. Not at the office, but at the historic conservatory downtown, a place that once hosted literary salons in the 1920s. It was intentional, blending the past with the future. The hall was filled with people I had once walked past in silence, people who used to assume I was just the quiet girl in the back office. Now they listened as I spoke from the podium, not with arrogance, but with conviction. I looked out at the crowd: editors, designers, interns, legacy authors. My parents, Gregory standing near the back, arms folded, but eyes locked on me, and I realized that everything had shifted. Not just ownership, identity, power, trust. When a business is passed down, people expect it to stay the same, I said. But true legacies don't survive by staying the same. They survive by evolving, by challenging assumptions, by being brave enough to let go of who we were so we can become what we're meant to be. There was a pause, a silence of understanding, then a quiet wave of applause, not thunderous, but sincere. My mother was wiping her eyes. My father nodded once slowly. Gregory didn't clap, but he didn't look away either. That was enough for now. Afterward, I walked alone through the hallway of portraits, the past presidents of More Publishing. All men, all stern, all frozen in time. I stopped in front of my grandfather's photo and studied it. I didn't know the man well, but I knew what he stood for. I knew what he built, and I knew what it cost. Then I looked down at the program in my hand, the new masthead design, the vision statement rewritten in sharp modern type. It wasn't rebellion, it was renewal. What began as a story of exclusion had become a story of transformation. The ending that once felt like exile had become the beginning of everything that mattered. As I stepped outside into the night air, I felt no bitterness, no lingering need for validation, only peace. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet seat at the head of the table you built yourself. And when the time comes, you pass it on, not because you're done, but because you finally understand what true legacy means. Not inheritance, not control, but opportunity.